Hello and welcome. So today I'm here with Lydia and we work in the same town, little small town of Forster, and we both have a passion for really educating people on how the body works. And we've gotten together today to talk about hormones because it's a really misunderstood area. And I come from a kinesiology perspective, so I look at the emotions attached and the stress attached, but Lydia has her own point of view. Say hi.
Hi, thanks for having me here. It's so nice to chat to you. So I'm a nutritionist, and we were just discussing before we pressed record how, there's so many different ways to approach health, and we all have such different expectations towards health. So as a nutritionist, I now approach hormones from a really root cause place because it's definitely my passion for my own health, selfishly. And I've been led down many rabbit warrens and been led down many garden paths. And I think where I'm at now as a nutritionist, I could say I'm recovering from the wellness industry, if I could be so bold. And I love teaching people how to understand how their body works. And that's my main passion, is getting people to understand how to look after themselves using food as the tool to help them become as resilient as possible. And hormones are the most important thing to get on track when it comes to overall health. So I'm really excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, and I think with hormones, it's just brushed aside so much. It's quite a misunderstood area that we get in clinic, and particularly allied health seem to have just a really basic treatment plan, a couple of pills, and that's it. Look at why they've gone haywire to begin with. Let's just fix it. And for me in clinic, it's been a sense of trying to find, well, okay, well, yeah, like Lydia said, like, why has this gone haywire to begin with? Because hormones, it's never just, oh, your estrogen's out or your periods are out. If those are out, then there's going to be so many other systems that are out of whack as well. And I don't think that health should be easy, and it shouldn't be this big complicated thing, but we make it really complicated, and we try and narrow down all these different symptoms and focus on that. Whereas I want to talk today about, your hormones and there's this thing called the HPA axis and the stress there. And yes, there's women's hormones, but there's also men's hormones and sleep hormones and hunger hormones and everything else there, your insulin as well. So that's kind of where we wanted to come from today, talking about hormones, not just your periods, and the whole broad spectrum, and actually have a look at how your nervous system and your endocrine system fit together.
That's beautiful. And you hit a really good point just there, this idea of kind of like chasing symptoms. I feel like both the allopathic world and the naturopathic world or holistic world can get caught in just chasing symptoms. And that's where you kind of, you're like, oh, I've got this symptom now, and you just kind of get on the back foot because you're just chasing your symptoms. Whereas we want to go deeper and we want to go, hang on, as you say, like, where's that actually coming from emotionally, as you're so good at helping people with, and then nutritionally, like, what are you made of?
Can you like describe that? Because I think that's probably a good place to start if we talk about the system as a whole, and then we go into the emotional side after that.
Yeah, definitely. So the way I like to approach people is, I think a good preface to what we're about to go into is just changing our mindset as towards like the way we view the human body. Instead of seeing it as kind of like mechanical or like pieces of a puzzle or like machinery, I really encourage people to think of their body more like a plant. And when a plant's struggling, we don't go, what's wrong with that plant? There's something wrong with that plant. We go, okay, let's check the soil. Like, let's put it in the sun. Does it need more nourishment? What's wrong with its environment? That's what we ask when a plant's not doing well. But when we're not doing well, we go, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Fix me. There's something broken. And I really love approaching people like they're plants, and I really want people to approach themselves as though they're plants. I personally am really bad at looking after my indoor plants at home, so this resonates so deep to me.
The same. I'll die and then overwater.
Yeah, like, oh crap, quick, I'll put in some water. So it's, you know, and I watch these plants and I observe them and I think, okay, they're not dead. They're still alive, but they've adapted to their environment. So they're not growing new leaves. They're not, you know, as resilient as they should be. Like if something comes along, it will like take over, but they're not dead. And I think this is really important to understand. We are in this weird place where it's like, oh, if it doesn't kill you, then you're okay, kind of thing. Like when it comes to our health, it's like, oh, you know, does it kill you? Yes, no, okay, well, it's safe. And I'm particularly talking about the pill right now as well, and that's, you know, synthetic hormones that are just so commonly used and so commonly prescribed. And it's like, you know, oh, it doesn't kill you, it's fine, get over it. But this is the difference. And I think, can we just use that analogy of the plants? Hormones that are balanced, remember the body's constantly trying to get into balance. It's doing everything possible to get back into balance. And sometimes that presents as a symptom that's uncomfortable. But your hormones, when your hormones are in balance, it's the difference between surviving, like my little plants that are surviving, or like living and thriving and being, you know, emotionally resilient, pain-free, you know, enjoying life and actually being able to participate in life because you haven't got some kind of like horrific body pain or horrific excessive bleeding, or, you know, even for men, like hair loss or whatever it is, like, and men and women. But, you know, it's the hormones, when the hormones are in balance and when the body's nourished. And think of that plant, like you take that plant outside and you understand, like, what do you need to thrive? Like, what do you, as a unique little plant, like, how can I get you thriving again? And that's your hormones. Like, once you get your hormones balanced, and this is where nutrition comes into it. Like, you take that plant outside and you go, okay, where do you get your energy from? Where is your energy coming from? And then, you know, you can bring a plant back to a thriving state where it can grow new leaves and it can grow tall. I've done this many times. It is possible.
And I love what you posted today on your Instagram, which was the body is always trying to heal itself. And it's so true. It's so absolutely true. It is always trying to find its own balance. It's just doing what it can with what it has at the time. So we need to figure, yeah, like you said, we just need to figure out where it's out of balance and why.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think as well, to preface, because I do want to go quite deep into the specifics of hormones, but I just want to get a really approachable understanding of, you know, where your body's at right now is not the consequence of bad luck and genetics. And when we diminish the intelligence of the body down to just bad luck and genetics, we're not allowing space for it to be as wise and as smart and as adaptable as it can be. And everything health-wise that we're all experiencing is mostly a product of our environment. And, you know, not just our environment, our grandmother's environment and our grandmother's grandmother's environment.
Yeah.
So we're up against
We forget that. Yeah, we're not just this little lone thing out in the world. We've been influenced.
Yeah.
And we can't avoid that. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. So do you want me to go into a little bit about the HP tag?
Yeah, love it.
Hba Axis, as you called it, which is all correct and all linked in.
Please, let's go deep.
Okay,
so we're talking here, you know, when we're talking about hormones, I think when we're out of balance, what do we see first? You know, we see the menstrual cycle, you know, things like pain. You're not meant to have pain. You're meant to be regular. You're meant to, feel peaceful through your menstrual cycle. But then you've also got sleep. We've got hair growth. Growth is a big factor, where you're too much growth, too little growth in all, up, down, out, in. and and we've got our blood sugar as well. What have I missed?
Well, I mean, sex drive.
Sex drive, thank you. Of course. Love talking about sex drive.
And appetite, I mean, they kind of come in the same place, like they're like the same thing, like appetite, sex drive, and then like participation in life, that hunger for life, the hunger, like it's like all coming from a similar place as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us the biochemical rundown.
Yeah, okay, so very quickly, well, no, I'll go into it in quite detail. We've got time. So when we're looking at all those processes, so I think if we could go if we could just simplify it to like hungry, happy, and horny.
Yeah, I love that. If you're hungry, happy, and horny, then you're in balance, right?
That's balance. That is balance. And for men and women, I think that's something men and women can both relate to. So essentially we are our nervous system, and a big part of our nervous system is how our hormones are communicating with one another. So we have something called an Hba axis, or I like to talk about the HP tag, which is the same thing, but it's just including 2 other glands. So essentially it starts in the brain, and we have our hypothalamus, our pituitary, our thyroid, our adrenals, and our gonads. And we all have gonads, our ovaries, or in the men's case, the testes. And our HP tag, with the thyroid being in the middle, they all release hormones. And those hormones are both stimulating and inhibiting based on what the body needs to do. So a really basic understanding of a hormone reaction that's not to do with like sex or making babies, a really basic hormone that you can all connect in with right now is the idea of fear, the idea of fight or flight. So going into this place of, okay, stress response, and then feel it in your body. So we can easily just create that in our mind, as you know, and I'm really excited to hear you talk more about that. So we can just create that in our mind, and what happens is our hormones adapt based on what the environment's signaling. So when we go into that fear place, or that fight or fight place, the hormones that become the priority are our stress hormones. So what happens then are our stress hormones become the dominant, and our digestive hormones and our sex hormones and our thyroid hormones, they all become a bit suppressed, and we go into survival mode. And then what happens is these hormones are all communicating to one another. Are we safe or are we not safe? And that's kind of a simplified version of what's happening hormone-wise in the body. And I'll go into a little bit more specifics to do with the menstrual cycle, I think, about like PCOS, but essentially the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenals, and gonads all release hormones that are communicating to one another based on how safe we are. And if the body doesn't believe it's safe, if there's no safety perceived, and I think you would know for sure that a lot of people don't feel safe based on so many different things, not just psychological, but so many different things. And when the body doesn't believe it's safe, I like to think of your thyroid, it's kind of in the middle between, so it's in the middle between here and down there, and it's like the captain of your ship, and it's just looking ahead like, are we safe? Is there like an iceberg or like a whale or a storm coming up? Or is it just like smooth sailing? And this thyroid gland will change the hormones produced based on the signals it's receiving. And those hormones produced affect every single cell in our body, not just those glands that are in the HP tag. And a client said it really well when I was trying to give that analogy. She said, You don't want to be stuck out at sea for too long. And if your thyroid gland thinks that there's just like stress ahead and like constant stress ahead, then you will potentially be stuck out at sea for a very long time. And that can be like your body, your energy resources, your metabolism. So the way your body uses energy, it will start to conserve how it uses energy. And a lot of our hormone processes will start to slow down. And one of the first things to go are those three: happy, hungry, and horny. As soon as the body doesn't feel safe, as soon as there's an iceberg ahead, we will down-regulate all the processes we're doing, because you don't need those three for survival.
Yeah, and I think the really good point here with all of, I love the way that you've explained all of that. And the hormones are like the body's eyes. I think, our body actually can't see. We see, but our body can't see what's going on. So it feeds, like it communicates with itself based off these hormones. And again, whether we're feeling safe or not safe is based off the tension that we have in our body. So it's not only just the environmental stuff or what we're putting in our body, it's also the messages coming from within our body and whether we actually feel safe or not whether we are safe or not. And yeah, so tell us a little bit more about that cycle and how it would work on like a daily basis.
So if we could focus on, because I want it to be, so we'll focus on like hormones to do with sex hormones, I think, because a lot of us can make that a bit more tangible. So to put simply, men have a 24-hour cycle and women have a monthly cycle. So men and women are very, very different when it comes to the hormones we're producing. And I love that you just said that hormones are like our eyes. I love that. That's perfect. That's exactly it. I couldn't have worded that better myself. And that even helps me to understand better as well. So I'd like to talk about the female monthly cycle and focus on the sex hormones, because that is something that is treated like an on-off switch, when in fact it's actually so much more complicated than that. And your monthly cycle influences your heart health, your brain health, your skeletal health, your digestive health. And your monthly cycle or your sex hormones are influenced by all those things as well. So your liver health, your gut health, your skeletal health also influence how that works. So it's not like one causes the other. It's just a big soup of information being shared. So men having their cycle, I think it's important that men actually do understand that they have a cycle, and to understand that that influences, not only their sex drive, but influences their mood and their appetite and how well they can like participate in things. Men's hormones, generally speaking, are a little bit more straightforward than females, but I think there isn't enough understanding of the fact that I think we think like, okay, men just have testosterone and women just have estrogen and progesterone. And it's just not that black and white. We all have the same hormones, we just have them in different levels. So men have progesterone and they have estrogen and they have testosterone. And women have progesterone, have estrogen, and have testosterone. It's just that our symptoms and our hormones are much more accentuated. They're in greater amounts and they fluctuate a lot more than men's do, generally speaking. So should I go deeper into that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's really what we often see people come to us for when they have hormone issues is the sex hormones.
Yeah, that's what most people think of when we think hormones. So I'll talk about the female cycle because that's something I'm personally very passionate about. I was diagnosed with PCOS when I was 16 and it's been my lifelong journey. So I'll talk about the different phases of the menstrual cycle. And as you said, they're naturally pain-free. They're naturally a time for, learning your body. But really, the big thing about having a cycle is for the health of your entire body. A healthy menstrual cycle influences everything beyond making a baby. It influences, brain function. It influences like how well you can think, how well you can sleep, how well you can digest, so many things. So to simplify it, I'd say the menstrual cycle has 2 phases. Many people will say like there's like 4 phases, and that's also correct, but I just really want to focus on the 2 phases of the menstrual cycle. So one phase is the follicular phase, and that's the first part of the cycle. So that's from day 1 until ovulation. And every woman has a totally unique cycle. And there is no structure, there is no standard. Every woman has her own unique cycle. So follicular phase is day 1 to ovulation, and that length can be any length depending on the stresses in that woman's life during that time. So follicular phase is not static. It is, as we've just said, a product of safety. And the idea of follicular phase is day 1, we bleed, and that's where all our hormones are really low. So estrogen's really low, progesterone's really low, and testosterone's low. And then from day 1 to when we ovulate, that's when the hormones slowly increase, but then ovulation can be seen as your high hormone phase. So that's when all the hormones should be nice and high. So that's follicular phase. And then there's luteal phase. And I like to think of ovulation as you lay a little egg and then you've got to incubate that egg. And so luteal phase is a little bit more static, that length of time. There's only so long you can keep an egg in an environment to, find out whether it's going to hatch or not. And that's when so ovulation's when you're fertile, and that fertile window, every month your body goes, did we get fertilized or not? Are we fertilized? Yes, no? Okay. And then the body will respond hormone-wise, involving the whole HB tag as to whether or not that luteal phase will result in then having a follicular phase again.
Yeah.
So a really important thing that I want people to take away from this is just because you have a menstrual bleed does not mean you're ovulating. And that's really, really important. And that's something I'd love to go into. I think before I go into the hormones in a bit more detail, I'd really love to hear from you, your understanding of that kind of follicular phase, stress and emotion. And I don't know, I just want to hear what you have to say about that.
I really wanted to jump in there too, because that was the way, and I like that's exactly how I describe it as well. And I love the wave idea, because I really see women as that wave. And the way I describe it is that when we in that follicular phase, we kind of come up and out into the world, and we feel really strong and powerful. And it's, we want to be out in the world a lot more, and we want to. It's, if you can think of the hormones a lot as women's love as well, our love really comes out, and we want to hold the world, and we want to share our love. And it's, that's where we can really be there for our friends and our partners and everything. And then ovulation comes, like you said, and it's like, I love the world. It's like, yes, please, like I'm so open. And you get creative and everything. So, and then I think of progesterone as our creative cycle. And so our estrogen in that luteal phase drops a little bit, and the progesterone comes higher. So it's like we hold the world, but actually then after ovulation, we need to come back inwards. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, the part that a lot of us struggle with, because we really love that follicular phase, and it really depends on when it goes out of balance. It's because we're doing life in a really tough way, where like we're cautious with our love. If you can think of that first part of the cycle as that, it's like we want to be really strong. It's like too strong. And then that's when it can influence ovulation as well, because you're being too strong. You're not kind of letting it all come up and out during ovulation. So that's what I see with those PCOS clients. It's that they're trying to be strong rather than naturally powerful. There's a really big difference. And then you go into that luteal phase, and it's again, you've got to come back inwards and let yourself be held. You've got to come back and process all the emotions that you've taken on the 2 weeks before that, or that wherever you were during your follicular phase. And so it's again, how well are we at being held and letting love back in, right? So you've put out all your love, and then you have to let the love back in. And that's often where we feel really hard fucking done by, right? Because you haven't done the dishwasher, you haven't done this to me, done that to me. It's like, and we get really pissed off with it. It's because you're not letting that love back in, and you're not letting that self-love come in. And we feel like our world feels smaller, but when you actually allow yourself to be held and you come in and spread out, then that's, and I think of the menstrual cycle, like the menstruation like that. It's like, okay, we're spread out. It's like, come back in and just like lay low for a while. And again, it's that kind of self-love phase and space and time, cry phase. You have to let it all out. And I'm going to chuck in a really quick side note here that, and this is, this is one of those practitioner pieces of knowledge that studies haven't backed up yet. So I want you to, but grief and fertility are so hand in hand, because again, it's that cyclic feeling of, do I actually really let go? And I'll often find after a huge, again, cortisol and fertility, but it's really about the emotions and how well we go up and down with that emotional cycle. And so are we letting ourselves be held? Are we letting the grief come out? Are we letting ourselves cry or feel sorry for ourselves and the world for a little bit? And as women, some of us will cycle with the full moon and the new moon and all over the place. So we actually are in a position to hold each other. But women I think we're trying to come back to it. I can really feel that. But for so long there, we all started to be individual rather than holding each other and allowing ourselves through that love cycle. And we want that back. We do. We're craving it back. So that's how I see. That's the emotional side of the cycle that I see.
Yeah. Oh, I could listen to you talk about that for so long. And we really feel it. And that's the thing, like, when, as you said, when you position yourself separate from others, and maybe you've chosen a partner that's a male and you're trying to like use them for everything. And it's like, we definitely need our collective to kind of like resonate with the fact that the fluctuations are normal and healthy. And that's that.
We get really mad at our men for not being able to hold us through that luteal phase. It's like, no, they're not meant. We need other women for that.
Exactly. And that idea as well, after ovulation, or if we've ovulated, and that whole idea of grief is like, yeah, every month when you don't make a baby, the body has to let go of, like, it is a grieving process. So I really think that's a really important thing for people to understand. And to go into it a little bit more deeply, hormone-wise, in order to produce progesterone, we produce progesterone as females when we ovulate. And so, as you said, that time, that follicular phase, if we're trying to be too strong, and if we're stimulating the body to produce more testosterone and more estrogen, because estrogen and testosterone, they feed off one another. And most of us today are estrogen and testosterone overloaded, like we're filled with the stuff. And testosterone can actually turn into estrogen. And, the biggest thing that I'm seeing in the world is not necessarily a deficiency of anything, but it is an overload of estrogen in men and women, and an overload of the wrong form of estrogen. We have many different forms of estrogen, but as you said, that kind of like that strong side, the survival estrogen, that form of estrogen that has that close relationship with testosterone, where we're almost like, so in survival mode that the body feels this intense need to just cortisol us up to the eyelids and estrogen us up to the eyelids, because every single cell, it's not just your ovaries, every single cell in your body can make estrogen, because we need estrogen. It's really, really important for us, but we are overusing it. It's like a superpower that we've lost control of, like the Hulk. We can't control it anymore because we're using it so much for survival to get us meeting these very like intense deadlines and this intense pressure we're putting on ourselves. So
that strength versus power, right? Like if you're in that stress mode, you're really looking for that strength and that, no, I can fucking cope, give it to me. And that's how I get my power. But if we're in that kind of, there's a difference between the real estrogen cycle, which is that testosterone is balanced with. It's like love and power, and all that kind of stuff. But it is really like, oh no, I feel connected with this. I have my own boundaries in place. I'm really connected to what you're inspired by something rather than obligated. And, I really feel that kind of obligation is that more testosterone, and it uses that more like that strong feeling, whereas that inspiration side and that connection side is that's just got that little bit of more feminine through it.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. And what I see, so the way I work with people when they're in that place, is it's how can I teach their body safety through food? And particularly during that follicular phase, how can I use food as a way to teach their body that they're safe and they can ovulate? And this is why I say I'm recovering from the wellness industry, is because when it comes to food and the way our body works, my education, my upbringing very rarely held space for how much energy we need from our food. And I feel like the health industry, both allopathic and naturopathic, have severely underestimated how much energy we need from our food. And if I was to put that in a scientific term, I'm talking calories. Like, how much does our body burn in a day? And how much do we burn when we're ovulating versus when we're menstruating versus when we're growing a baby? Like, how much energy from food do we actually need? And I feel like my upbringing was very much like, you need to focus on getting your micronutrients in, like make sure you're getting enough, magnesium, and getting enough of your phytonutrients and your antioxidants, which are all super important. But the foundation, and this is so important for follicular phase, the foundation is, are you consuming sufficient calories, which is just sufficient energy to cope with the amount of stress you are under? And, are you getting sufficient macronutrients? Are you balancing your blood sugars with your macronutrients? Are you eating regularly enough so that your body doesn't have to go into that survival mode because you've let your blood sugar drop so low? So are you getting enough?
Because I love this point. Can you go into that whole blood sugar?
Yeah.
Michael? Yeah.
Definitely. So carbs, protein, and fat, they're our 3 macronutrients. And our blood sugar is, again, like a wave, right? It's like this beautiful wave happening in our body, and we need sugar. We need to have a healthy blood sugar response. And so when I have clients come and see me and they're like, I don't know if I'm ovulating, my periods are horrible, I get pain around ovulation, I ask them, okay, like how often do you eat? And they're like, oh, I don't eat breakfast because I'm not hungry, because I'm running on cortisol, and I'll explain that. And then they're like, I'll have lunch, and then, you know, I'll have a big meal at night time. And essentially, like, I ask them, well, what's your body running on the other, you know, 18 hours? Like, where is it getting energy from? Because your blood sugars have to be maintained, and they have to be stable. If your blood sugar drops too low, you're dead. If it's too high, you're dead. So your body has to maintain a healthy blood sugar balance. And this is the best way to produce an egg, to be able to like ovulate, is to have healthy blood sugars. So what happens in human beings, and particularly women, because we use fat for energy in the body more than men, and that's a whole different thing that I'll talk about maybe today or another time. But when we wake up in the morning, our blood sugar's low. And in order to get our blood sugar up, the body has a couple of options, because it needs to get it up, because you've got to start burning energy. And when I'm talking about blood sugar, I mean glucose, and glucose is the main fuel for the cell to then make energy, which is magnesium ATP. So in order for the cell to make energy, we need that glucose coming in, and that's why we have sugar in our blood for a short period of time, up and down. So in the morning, you wake up and your body has a couple of options. I need energy. I need that mag ATP, like I need energy. So that means I need glucose. So I can either access that from the glycogen stored in my liver, but we generally can only store 8 hours of glycogen in our liver. So that's been burnt up, because when was your last meal? More than 8 hours ago. So you've used that one up. The other option is to turn your fat cells into sugar, which is the dream. Like, that's what we all want. We think, I just don't eat, and then my body just eats the fat on my body, and it's, oh, I'm skinny forever, and everyone's happy, and I feel good. Unfortunately, that's not the reality, because let's just think of blood glucose as like money coming in to pay off your bills that you've got. And that's, you know, coping with stress, that's your bills. So if you wake up in debt, your body's not going to sell the thing that's the cheapest to run. Like, running fat on your body is cheap. Like, fat doesn't need any energy to run. It's a very awesome potential energy store, but we don't need energy to run it. So the main place the body will get the glucose from is it's going to sell the most expensive item. And the thing that's the most expensive to run, that we don't need for survival, our muscles. And I would say most women today are under-muscled.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is this wonderful survival process called gluconeogenesis, where cortisol is released, because obviously we're in a famine because we are running out of sugar. So we're going into this gluconeogenesis phase where our muscles are stimulated by our stress hormones to break down into their little proteins. And then this whole process happens in our liver, where our liver turns the protein into glucose. So essentially we become a little sugar factory because we haven't eaten enough carbs and protein and fat to cope with the amount of stress we're under, and we've left it too long between meals.
So essentially you're saying intermittent fasting doesn't work for weight loss, right?
I had to learn this the hard way.
And also, right, if we're looking at it from that, so you've got those two nervous systems. Essentially, you've got the rest, digest, detox, heal nervous system that switches off when your cortisol's high.
Everything stops. Cortisol.
Everything stops. But what we've forgotten to realize is that when we have too much free-floating cortisol in our system, and we have too much waste product that's building up because you're not resting, digesting, detoxing, healing, your body has too much in your blood system. It has to get rid of it. Remember, your body's always trying to heal you. So what it does is this beautiful little sneaky thing where it takes that toxin, chucks it in a fat cell and says, we'll just deal with that when you actually rest.
It's so nice, isn't it? It's like, I always like use that analogy of how messy my home gets sometimes because I'm too busy to clean it. So I'll just chuck all this junk
in the cupboard. Exactly. Your nice ass and thighs and your belly. Yeah.
store
Just
it
leave
there.
it there. Yeah,
And
exactly.
that leads
So
into
if you're not eating, you're actually essentially putting yourself into that cortisol cycle even more.
exactly. That's the best way to stress your body out, is to let your blood sugar get low, and then that's survival mode. And for some women, that blood sugar tolerance, like, so think of PCOS. It's a metabolic issue, and a big part of it is it's linked to diabetes, because a woman is struggling, or men have a type of their own PCOS actually, so they're struggling to use the energy in their food, because their body's stuck in that fight or flight place, as you said, where their cortisol's so high, so they're struggling to even use the energy they're eating. And that's like a carbohydrate intolerance, or a glucose intolerance, to put simply. That analogy, that idea of like stuffing everything away because I don't have energy, like liver's processing, instead of liver getting rid of all your excess crap, it's becoming a sugar factory because you're not eating enough. But then the other side of that is when you go into that healing phase, so when you start eating more food and balancing your blood sugar levels, which means combining carbs and protein and eating as frequently as your body needs you to eat, which takes training to relearn, because we can't just use hunger. We have to learn other signs, and maybe we'll go into that. But essentially, when you go into that healing phase, what can happen is, for me, what happened was my skin got heaps worse for a period of time, because all that stuff stored away in my little fat cells is doing like a spring clean.
You have to pull everything out of the cupboard first, and it looks like a mess for a little bit. Yeah.
It got dirtier before it got cleaner.
Yeah. And it's so true. And I think that leads nicely into, well, I'm just going to chuck this in next because I want to get through, but sleep has a big part in this as well, because if we're talking about hormones, essentially we're talking about hormones are affected by your stress hormones, all your stress levels and your cortisol levels. So if you're stressed out, your hormones are going to be fucked. Basically, that's kind of it. And that sleep has a big part in this as well, because if you're in this cortisol cycle all day, you're going to be wired at night. And that's a lot. Like, you've only got 8 hours, maybe, if you're lucky. Most of us are getting 6 hours of sleep if we're lucky at night. Mm-hmm. That's, if you can imagine your body, okay, it's like you've given yourself 6 hours to do a full spring clean of your body each night. It just never catches up. And that's why you're waking up sluggish in the morning, and then you have your coffee, and then you're like, I need to get strong again. And you push yourself, I'm going to hit the gym at 6 a.m.
Totally. My favorite thing is when women tell me, I feel the best after I do like a really high intensity exercise. Like, that's when I feel really good. And you're like, you're not going to build muscle doing that, and you're not going to build any kind of resilience, because you're using it to release the stress hormones to give you energy.
Yeah. So tell us about sleep and what we need for sleep, energy-wise, throughout the day.
Yeah, so again, there are hormones that are really important for that. I think the main thing is balancing your blood sugar levels. If there's anything anyone takes from this, balance your blood sugar levels. So I mentioned before the glycogen in your liver. I want you to think about the glycogen in your liver. It's like being stored there by choice. The body chooses whether or not to store glycogen. And there is another thing where excess estrogen can actually inhibit the storage of glycogen in the liver, because again, that excess estrogen is like, we're in survival mode. We don't have time to like build that up. So the way to think about glycogen in your liver is it's like a battery that's charging throughout the day. And you need to charge a battery kind of like slow and steady throughout the day and give it little bits. And so combining meals, so having a meal that has carbs and protein, most importantly, because carbs raise blood sugar and protein lowers blood sugar. So combining the two and having those meals regularly before your blood sugar drops too low helps build up your glycogen stores. And I always think it's so interesting that the liver stores about 8 hours of glycogen, and kind of like the sweet spots for sleep is 8 hours. So if you're eating regular, and I think I'm a big believer in a nighttime snack. I have no idea where this no food after 8 p.m. thing made sense. But I'm a big believer in a nighttime snack. Obviously, don't sit down to like a steak, like right before you go to bed, or like, you know, a whole baked dinner. Be sensible, like smaller meals, because even big meals are a stress on the system. So like smaller meals, but nice and balanced. And you have that right before you go to bed. And what you're teaching your body is that I have fuel enough to sleep, because we need energy to sleep. That's the thing most people don't realize.
Is that energy, what energy is not just for exercise? That you're burning it every single second, like millisecond of the day, just for breathing and for thinking and for your normal, you know, little hand movements.
Everything. We don't just lie down and die. So it's really hard work sleeping, and darkness is really stressful as well. And that's another hormone thing. Like darkness is stressful because the sun's gone and we're no longer getting that information. Our eyes, our hormone eyes, aren't getting the information through our eyes of light and that red light that's produced by the sun. And then we go into that darkness. And then what happens is we turn on some blue lights. And all of that stuff, it requires more energy to metabolize, to process. And so if you just have your one meal and you haven't had enough meals throughout the day, then what can happen is that tired but wired thing, where you push it in the evening and you watch some TV, and you know, a lot of parents, they love that time after the kids go to sleep. It's like my time. And you know, they're really tired and grumpy, and then there's that second wind that a lot of people get, and that second wind before bed is that tired, but people feel the most productive then. And you know, that's fine. Like I love that you need to get what you need to get done. But what is happening in your body is you've run out of energy and you've increased your stress. And so the best way to keep that afternoon, that evening time, is to increase your energy to match the stress, so that when you go to lie your head down later, you've got enough energy to produce the hormones that we need to sleep, and you've got the glycogen stored in your liver, so that after 4 hours of sleeping, your body doesn't then upregulate cortisol, stress hormone, to then initiate the gluconeogenesis, because that happens while you're sleeping, and then excess hormones are being produced. And so you like wake up in the middle of the night and then you can't get back to sleep, or the sleep isn't satisfying, or as you said, you wake up tired because you've been using stress for energy while you sleep to balance your hormones.
And I think that's ultimately our point that we're getting to. Are you using blood sugar and food for energy, or are you using cortisol for energy? And if you're using cortisol for energy, then the whole HP tag is going to be out of whack.
It just stops.
If you're using food, then everything regulates nicely. You feel, what is it? Happy,
healthy, no, happy, hungry, horny.
Happy, hungry, horny. Exactly. Happy, hungry, horny. And if you're stressed, we know as women, if we're stressed, we're not horny. You know, we're stressed, we're like, get out of here. And again, that's that strength thing. So we've got to let ourselves come inwards as well. And like you said, it goes like this all day. And so we need those little moments of, I call it breathing time, you know, actually taking a breath throughout the day. It's that moment where, okay, when you think about the world coming in towards you, it's just that sense of, I'm just going to take a breath out for a minute. You know, we don't have to do all these little tasks with this air of aggression. You know, we don't need a lot of mental energy to unpack the dishwasher. Like, we know what we're doing, but so, you know, it can be, we can spend so much over focus on you know, on all these little chores. And it's like all these little tiny chores are taking up so much space. But blood sugar, breath, you know, if we're using blood sugar and breath throughout the day, your hormones are going to balance themselves and you're going to be happy, hungry, and horny. I think that's ultimately what we want to get to, right? Is for people to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. That's really important. And I think just to kind of wrap up everything I've said, if you've got any hormonal symptoms, like if you've got painful periods, if you're bleeding too much, if your cycle's too long, if your thyroid's struggling to work, if you don't have a libido, if you're struggling to fall pregnant, like all of those things, and a lot of that relates to men as well in its own special way, but all of those things, simplify it. It's a sign of your stress has become greater than your energy, and you're most likely underestimating how much food you need to eat. And to make slow and measurable changes with your diet to learn how to balance your macronutrients, to learn how many calories you need, and don't see that as a dirty word, and don't see macros as a dirty word, and to actually use that in a really holistic, nourishing way where you can learn how to balance your body through food and stop underestimating how much you need to eat, and use the mathematical equation of stress rather than, you know, exercise or self-worth.
I love that. You've just summarized it perfectly.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk forever about this topic, but we both have clinics to get back to. So thank you so much for joining me for this, because I feel like, again, we could talk about it forever, but I think that's like a nice, simple, watch your blood sugar, watch your rest, make sure that they're balanced, and then your HP tag and your hormones are going to balance themselves because they want to balance themselves.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I hope I didn't go on too much
I
about
loved it. No, because people need this information.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And remember that your emotions flow too. So if you're stuck in emotion, if you're not letting it out and flow, that's another thing that's going to stress your body out. And so again, you know, cry. Lots, breathe, lots.
It's so good.
Cry, breathe, eat. That's pretty much it, right?
Done.
Done. All right. Thank you. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.